Okay, so as you can see, we got the Pacific map out now. And this is going to be the Coral Sea scenario. There are three little battle scenarios. This is going to be the rules introduction, but three very tiny battle scenarios. Now, what's really kind of weird here is there's sort of nothing in between. The old Rising Sun kind of had this problem too. I mean, what do you do with the Pacific is the problem. I don't know if this has alternate starting points for the Grand Campaign, but the old Rising Sun had a couple of different points where you could start the game. And then, you know, an Eastern Theater whole war situation starting in 41, 42, I'm not sure. So actually, I think there's only two scenarios, a 42 scenario and a 44 scenario that take you to the end. I don't know if that's still the case. I didn't see any indication of it, but it could well be that there's alternate starting points just baked into the campaign game that I'm not aware of. And then there were three little battle scenarios, all of which are one player's movement and combat phase in a turn. And there's kind of a, okay, it would be kind of neat if I had something a little bit in between those, you know, like a couple of turns within the campaign to look at, but neither game provided that. Which, of course, for me means, well, I'm not going to set up the whole Pacific Theater when I'm going to have to do that eventually anyway. So, well, you know, I guess my only exploration of the system is going to be one player's side of a turn. And I already have enough trouble focusing on naval rules that this just helps me become less effective at them. But let's take a look. Now, again, like with the other rule set, and it may be that there's not really much you can limit here. It doesn't tell you what rules you need. And the truth of the matter is, well, obviously you don't need the research, you don't need the diplomacy, you don't need the construction rules. All you really need is all the combat rules. And you actually do need them all, because to some extent you have to understand land combat, or have, you're going to have some land combat in here. It's not just a naval maneuvering scenario. We already handled the land war. There may be some things like invasions that are, I think they're covered only under naval operations. So, let's start looking at the different naval rules. First of all, we have a lot of different types of ships in this game. The old Third Reich A3R Rising Sun system kind of split things into carriers and ship factors. Well, this system doesn't stay that limited. So you've got the individual carrier units. You also have individual battleships, and cruisers are considered individual units. This is 3 cruisers. Each cruiser is worth 2 points. Destroyers are going to be flotillas of destroyers. The cruisers may include more than a single cruiser, I'm not sure, but they operate as a single counter worth 2, and you can have multiple instances of 2-point counters. Wow, I don't know if that comes across, but damn, we got some nice guys here. Okay. Anything else here? Under the they got pocket battleships, battle cruisers, all kind of stuff like that, which I'll pretty much work out with slightly different maybe production rules in terms of how long they take to create, and different costs on the charts we saw. In the North Atlantic scenario that I did, which was a miserable experience. So we have this, so no matter what, if it's a named 2 or 3 factor ship, it's going to take a certain amount of turns and a certain amount of shipbuilding points, whereas the cruisers are a little cheaper way to get those 2 factor ships, but they do have slightly different rules, I believe. Carriers are able to carry planes. I believe they're able to carry a number of plane factors, which are also represented here. Those are naval air squadrons. Each point of those is a third of an Army Air Force unit. If the two end up engaging, the Army Air Force get divided into 3 different counters. Well, they don't really. They get divided into 3 notional counters per strength point. So we've got a difference. Light ships are destroyers, cruisers, transports, and CVEs, and then heavy ships are everything else, really, the fast carriers and capital ships. Ships are going to be either slow or fast. Damaged ships are slow, CVEs are slow. Ships with an orange stripe, these are the older battleships and such, not you see some here, are going to be considered slow. They're restricted in certain ways. And transports and anything else is going to be considered fast. Okay, you have limits to how many ships you can base in a port. It's 50 factors per point of port. And I believe, I think artificial ports work the same way. You can organize and sometimes must organize your ships into a task force. Each task force can contain no fewer than 10 naval factors and no more than 25. And they're going to be represented with these markers on an island. Yeah, it's Iwo Jima. I thought it might be one of my little counter clippings. I make these little things off these frames so that I know who's what. And they're very tiny here. Task forces can't contain damaged units, submarines, ASW, or transports. They have to belong to the same faction, i.e. no Russians with Western allies, or, you know, with Axis, and no European Axis with Japanese, which they're not allowed to operate on the same map anyway. I want to hit on that at some point, and now that I just brought it up, I might as well. One of the things in this game is the restrictions are such that you can't move units between maps very easily. Some people can, like the US can allocate its forces to either map, but there's no accounting for, you know, like European troops marching into India or something, like we saw in World in Flames. So there's certain what-ifs that this game is not going to be able to handle very well, which is very disturbing because Rommel's reason for being in North Africa could be seen as to threaten India directly. Okay, let's see. Task forces cannot have inverted and uninverted units. If there are any inverted ones, they're all going to be considered inverted. Okay, if you have a fast carrier in a task force, the task force has to have at least a fast fleet factor for each fast carrier in that group. And this has some exceptions during Pearl Harbor strikes. So one of the factors of the task forces is they provide a fog of war type relationship in the game. They're going to be on the board, but not really known to the enemy player. But there's a little bit involved here. So when you transfer naval units between task forces, you have to announce this. There's so something is known about a task force, like when it sets sail, you know how many ships are in it or something. I'm trying to find that. But I guess that's not really worth looking too hard for. There's the Western Allies have to reveal to their opponents how many ships they have in each theater when asked. Okay. Fleets are going to be destroyers, cruisers, and non-carrier capital ships. Destroyers can conduct, and they set a series of operations that they can handle. Cruisers also have their own series. Now,
They both can protect seaborne invasions, I believe. They better be able to. Yeah. Okay, can carry or protect ground units for the destroyers, which is really cool because we're going to see destroyers actually being used against Guadalcanal in this scenario. That's forced to happen. And capital ships. So cruisers and capital ships can't actually launch an invasion, but they can help protect it. Anyway, they have this series of actions they can resolve. They can be involved in. The slow ships cannot do raiding actions. They cannot engage undamaged raiders. They have disadvantages when they're doing any interceptions. They can't, in the combat rounds, they can't fight something known as distant combat groups. The combat system for this is going to be much, much more detailed than the old Third Reich system. But I think it's approximately the same system as was in Rising Sun. And they can't evade in fleet combat. 5-factor battleships have an additional bonus to their DRM. For each 5-factor battleship in an attacked naval force, the defender's air defense level is increased by 1. Fast carriers have their series of actions they can provide, and some of those actions are air actions, like the counter-air, provide ground support. We also, of course, have shore bombardment, but if you look, like destroyers can't do shore bombardment, so they all have their own little, things that fit. Unlike in World in Flames, the ships aren't rated individually for these things. They're going to use their strength factors for everything. In a sense, the old A3R Rising Sun rules, hey, ships could do what ships can do, and they had a whole series of things they could do, and then carriers had another special series. Now we have, this determination of a difference between destroyers, cruisers, battleships. So there's a lot more overhead to all this. And it ends up being, I think, a more complicated, we'll see, but I think it's going to be more complicated to figure out what you can do and what you can't than it is even in World in Flames. In World in Flames, you only have to memorize, and I have to say this wasn't trivial, what the values on the ship counter mean. There were so many on there that it wasn't easy to do. But here, this isn't, I don't think, summarized in any of the player aids, so it means references to the rule books again and again, and the rule book is sadly not up to the task of holding together, I think. Brand new game, already showing signs, and I've tried to be as careful as I can while explaining what's going on. Okay. So a fast carrier is fully operational if it's undamaged and carrying all its naval air points. It has to be fully operational to affect certain aspects, searches, submarine defense. However, it does not have to have its full complement to participate in most of the operations that are involved here. Just some of these special things, which may or may not, in fact, it may be all of these operations, it just doesn't give certain modifiers. CVBs are 4-factor carriers. They have a fleet nationality DRM 1 greater than the other Japanese and American fast carriers. I don't know how big a deal that is. I don't think they can. They may have an easier time getting away, but they don't have a lot of combat capacity, I would think. For each CVB in an attacked naval force, the air defense level is increased by 1, kind of like the big battleships. Okay, we have escort carriers. This, I think, is only the Allies have these. These kind of grayish things. Actually, I think only the Commonwealth has them, strangely enough. No, we got U.S. escort carriers, too. So what do those do? Well, let's open up the rule book again and see, because it won't stay open without destroying it. So they have a series of things they can do in terms of protect sea supply, transport, much of what other ships can do. They can accompany something like a shore bombardment mission. I don't know what they do with it. They can do ground support, but only for a seaborne invasion. And they can intercept them.
I didn't think they could do this much. I thought they were pretty much relegated to protecting the ASW and stuff like that, the sea escort type stuff. Only the U.S. is allowed to build these, but they can build Commonwealth ones. Escort carrier air, they don't carry little planes like the real aircraft carriers do. They're assumed to have a number of factors of air equal to their factor. So they're always with their air power, I guess. But they have a more restricted usage. Okay. So now we have this air attack and fleet combat tables, which I don't know if those are different from the naval attack table. Let's take a look here. This is naval attack, this is air defense. Air attack. Let's see the air attack table. Wouldn't be using the air combat table, so this may be a mutual, the naval attack table may be mutually used, we shall see. They're used, yeah, so air attacks on fleets are going to be using this naval attack table, and there's different modifiers based on what you've got, so like planes coming in will have use their air nationality DRM, but the defender gets their naval DRM. And results are just going to be hits. Now, how hits are assessed against various units depends on the type of ship. So named ships are going to take hits until they're damaged or sunk as a complete unit. Cruisers get damaged or sunk in 2-factor increments. Destroyers, CVs, submarines, and ASWs are sunk as individual factors. Transports are damaged and sunk as individual factors. So for named ships, how are they sunk? They're sunk when they take a number of hits equal to or greater than their size in factors, or if they take a critical hit. And depending on where you are when you're sunk, different things may happen. At sea, you're sunk, but if you're sunk in port, you need to take a critical hit. You need to be destroyed by the critical hit to be sunk, or that's it. So yeah, you can take damage that would sink you, but then you're still in a repairable condition, i.e. some of the ships in Pearl Harbor, which were, you know, salvaged and brought back to the battlefield. A named ship is damaged when it takes hits one less than its size in factors, or if it takes a hit while it's providing shore bombardment, which is of course a land combat. Oh no, apparently not. I thought that was a land combat effect. Capital ships, if capital ships are damaged, they can't fire. If fast carriers are damaged, they can't launch or retrieve air units. Damaged ships are reduced to slow. They do not, no, they do have air defense. And they can be repaired for one shipbuilding point in 2 turns. Cruisers are repaired at no cost in 1 turn. Which is probably, I'm getting really a pain in the back from trying to deal with that. But one of these charts, the naval repair and construction should say that, so yeah, it takes a turn, it takes no cost in shipbuilding factors, or BRPs it seems. Okay. Effects of accumulated, let's see where we are. I don't know where we got to. Here we are. Okay, accumulated hits on named ships accumulate. During and between naval combat rounds, during naval combat, and in between hexes outside of naval combat, and they're only repaired once the ship returns to port. For raiders and ships engaging them, the combat effects accumulate during the first and second raider engagements. The first raider engagement is when you're actually trying to look for, when you're trying to slip by the enemy who's looking for you in order to engage the transports. The second is when you're trying to slip back home afterwards.
And they carry over from the first engagement to the second. Ships in port. This is air and harbor attacks against named ships in port, which are insufficient to damage or sink a named ship, and they're repaired immediately and have no effect. A ship that is already sunk in port is destroyed if it takes additional hits to damage it. So I guess you can just pound the hits like was done on the Arizona, I think. Now they suggest the Nevada here, so maybe I'm getting my battleships mixed up as to which one just got pounded when it was already, mostly underwater. Accumulating hits short of the number required to damage has no effect on the speed, firepower, or ability to handle naval air units. Ships that are damaged, accumulated hits beyond the number required to damage a named ship sink it. Okay, whenever a possibility of a critical hit occurs, one die is rolled. If the roll exceeds the size of the named ship, it takes a critical hit. So the smaller the named ship, the easier it is to crit. Now remember, you don't do this with cruisers. Critical hits then will be rolled in the following circumstances. If a natural 12 is rolled for an air, fleet, or submarine attack against a named ship, regardless of whether or not there's any damage or anything. Whenever it's sunk in port, you make a check. On a 7 or more surprise level, you make critical hit checks. If an atomic attack is made against it, if the attacker does more hits on a named target than needed to sink a ship in port, then a +1 for each additional excess hit will be added to the critical hit check. Multiple critical hits are prohibited though, so you only get one check. A critical hit has the following effects in addition to whatever triggered it. An undamaged ship will be damaged. A damaged ship at sea is sunk. A damaged ship in a port is sunk in port. A ship sunk in port is destroyed. Any excess hits beyond what's required to destroy the target are disregarded. No critical hits on cruisers. Okay. Cruisers are treated as two-factor named ships, in general, except for critical hits. If forces only cruisers, every 2 hits sinks a cruiser. If an odd number of hits are resulted, an additional cruiser is damaged. So you have to take the hits fully on the cruisers. We didn't see what the named ships took. So for example, so far we don't know what happens if you shoot at named ships. Who gets to distribute the damage? And I don't think that's been covered yet. So that's something to keep our minds out for. I doubt that we'll see it on this pass through, but we'll see. Right. A damaged cruiser, damage again is sunk. Light ships are going to be just single factors. When they're hit, they're sunk. So if I do 3 hits on a bunch of destroyers, 3 destroyers sink. If forces are combined with cruisers and one-factor naval units, they're going to be distributed evenly between the cruisers and the naval units, subject to the proviso that the number of one-factor ship factors sunk may not exceed the number of cruiser factors sunk until all the cruisers have been sunk. Thus, okay. Different types of one-factor naval units. As per 20.57, well, we're not there yet. That's losses for mixed forces. If a naval effects against a force containing cruisers and one-factor ships takes more factors, the excess damage is ignored, except it may disrupt a sea supply line, however that happens. Losses from mixed forces. If you hit multinationality or different types of ships, they must be distributed among all types involved. With any remnant loss which cannot be divided equally taken by the type having the most factors. Attacks on destroyers and transports carrying cargo. They can be eliminated if the enemy by enemy combat results as follows. In fleet combat, they're automatically screened and can only be fired on if all screened ships on their side are eliminated. However, there are means for undamaged cruisers that are damaged by heavy fire are screened and need not be sunk in order to attack screened naval units. Screened light ships are attacked as a group and take losses, according to 20.57, which is what we had back here. Air and submarine attacks, destroyers and transports carrying cargo may not be screened. They, along with other light ships in their naval force or combat group, are attacked as a group and take losses, according to 20.57, which I assume means you can choose something. I don't know if it means that they're a separate group that takes an even portion of the damage, or if they're just lumped in with those, and somebody, presumably the defender, gets to choose how to allocate the damage. That's not specified, of course. Effective attacks on our cargo. Okay, if there's not enough destroyers or transports to carry what's being carried, it's eliminated. So essentially, the defender can keep his transported stuff alive. I need to stop here. Like I said, reading this rule book, having it open, trying to read through it, it's killing my back. Okay, let's keep trying to push our way through. Now, we come to rules on transport ships. We had them in the last scenario, but we don't know quite what they do. And that's kind of a problem. Here, they don't really tell you much. I mean, they tell you this is the shipping capacities, but not an idea of what they're useful for in the game. And then we start going right into, and this is what I hate about this rule book, goes right into individual specific rules, like here, that they can be redeployed. What the hell do I care about this if I don't know what they're useful for, right? And then where they can be, they're not normally in bases. They're going to be in the SW maps or off-map boxes. The list of how many there are in each location at the beginning of the game, of the Grand Campaign. Yeah, that's not exactly a rule in my book, but... And then a list of of the optimal levels, but not what it means that they're at an optimal level, right? So, you know, I have an optimal level of 30 in the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean. So, okay, but now here we go. Maybe this will get into what it's saying. No, it talks about, you know, ones that are damaged not counting. But there's going to be a BRP penalty. Now, this is the first we heard of this. If you don't reach that optimal level, I guess. But that's not discussed already. Right? I mean, I'm serious. We do not have a discussion. We have a discussion of BRP penalties without a discussion of how they happen. And you know, obviously they have to fall below that value. And I don't think anywhere in this is that discussed. I think it must be discussed somewhere in the production rules. And then you can do some things with them if they're undamaged. You can ship oil that takes, what, multiple transports per oil counter. You can trace sea supply. Each line requires only one transport, so that's pretty cheap. If you're doing sea transport, invasion, or NRing units, you've got to commit transports to this, and I guess they flip over or something. And I think it's one per factor, but it may be... A transport could carry a 3-4 infantry unit or replacement in an army air factor, huh? Okay, where is that coming here? 1 for every 5 ground or air factors. Okay, so that is clear. BRP grants of up to 5 can be transported. With this, I don't know if you can combine that with the sea transport of units, like a 3-point unit and 2 BRPs. That would be cool if you could, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Now, anything that is being transported can be protected by naval units in the SW box, but if they carry out any of the activities, naval units in any SW box may be assigned to protect transports in that SW box which carry out any of the activities in 20.64A through D. Oh, that's these activities.
And I assume you can only send the ships to, one protection job. Damaged transports go back to port without any risk of interception, and then they'll be repaired for free. But they remain inverted until the owning power's next turn. Alright, I need another break. Sitting is not helping my back here. Okay, subs, specific locations where each nationality is allowed to operate. Again, unlike World in Flames, it doesn't, handle things in a cohesive manner. This thing's not staying lit, unfortunately. Okay, what do we have here? Subs on the board can accompany other fleet elements. And then we jump to construction and then air attacks. I mean, it's all very random how these are organized, right? They can't be air attacked, obviously, because they're underwater, or in ports because they're generally in, sub-havens. But if they're patrolling during the opposing player turn, they can be air attacked. We'll talk about patrols in a little bit. The basic idea of a patrol is you sail out to a hex and now you can intercept from that hex. We've seen this strategic warfare. Oh, can't scratch my ear without usage of subs. But they can also attack on board. ASWs, we also saw these. They can only be in SW boxes, ports, or map board boxes. They really can't be used on the board at all, as far as I know, other than, to park in a port. And what they do is they fight in the SW box, and they have modified the submarine attacks. That doesn't sound familiar. 22.9415. I wonder if that's the additional losses. 22.9415. Okay. I don't remember seeing this on the charts. Interesting. So I want to look this sucker up because we were doing submarine attacks. Oh, submarine attacks. Okay, so this is interesting. I was doing strategic warfare where the ASWs don't count. But if you make a submarine attack on the board, apparently the ASWs that you have out in the strategic warfare box are going to reduce the sub attack value. That's why we didn't see it, because we didn't have sub fighting. I don't know if they could be called into the Raider combats or not. No, we just jumped ahead to this set of rules, which is something else. Okay. Partial naval counters. So destroyer, CVE, ASWs, they're just change. You can use them as you like. Everything else isn't going to work that way. So I don't know what they mean by partial naval counters. There's no fixed value. They must be combined in the hex if the opponent doesn't like the clutter. Okay, basing. We already talked a little bit about how many ships can base somewhere. There's these port counters, which I believe they're not as heavy. Are they? I don't know. Let's see. They take research points to build, as well as BRPs. They're put on one hex islands. No more than one in a space.
They stay for the game. Either side can get them. And okay, and then we start talking about two front ports. These don't say anything about capacity, so I assume they have the same capacity as other ports. Specific rules for passing through the straits and such not, and the control of each of those. Okay, fleets that are in the Atlantic. Okay, in the Atlantic, U.S. box can carry out sea transport, and invasions only is allowed and controlled under certain special rules. Basically, these are going to be special rules for dealing with each of the different boxes, and they each have their own little special aspects to them. All right, I'm done for a while again. I'm sorry about this, but wading through these is hard because I don't have a real grasp of the naval rules, as is always the case when I face naval rules. And I got some food or something waiting for me, I guess. Oh crap! I screwed up the map dealing with this heavy book, but okay. So movement for naval aspects, they have some restrictions crossing the various tight straits, etc. All that, each individual cases instead of some general rule. They are allowed to intercept into the straits, though. Suez Canal. Movement for all the different off-board boxes. Again, all their own special rules, as opposed to some general case. Base changes. Okay, you can change base during a movement phase. You may have to move to a port which is not operational. What? May move to a port that's not operational, but the range of activities from that port is limited. All base changes are simultaneous. These can be attacked through air attacks or interceptions. If you're forced to retreat, you go back to your original base and are inverted. The distance is 40 hexes in the Europe or 20 in the Pacific between bases. And then there's going to be costs for the moving out of the various boxes, however those are allowed. And again, I'm going to have to look that up in each specific case and probably never get used to it because there's no, simple general rule stated. There's just this series of individual special cases. And likewise, if your port gets knocked out and captured, whatever, you have to move to the nearest base. These ships can be intercepted, however interception is done. Alright, what can you do with your ships? Well, we don't know, but you can do stuff with your ships. That's basically what the introduction to this rule says. And it's really funny because the rules are very verbose in terms of being repetitive, but very sparse in terms of giving you any idea of what the fuck is going on. Whenever you use a ship, you invert it. If you have 10 or more naval factors, you have to create a task force. I don't know what these CGs are. We have counters for a bunch of them. They're numbered. The different fleet naval status charts only has one in it. So we'll see if those are described anywhere and if we learn anything as we skim through. Fast carriers have to have fleet factors to match them that are fast. Damaged units can't do anything except probably go home or something. Transports, if they're aborted, whatever's going with them is unaffected, but the transports can't be used for naval operations relating to the destination supply zone.
You can change base. Hey, didn't we already have this rule? Yeah, probably. It's up here. But now we're going to talk about it again and probably not say anything more. And then likewise returning to base, which can be intercepted. Oh, God. If you don't have room for your cargo is wiped out. Okay, some rules on transports, which don't seem to say anything. Most of these rules don't say much of anything until you need to look them up, and then you find them and see what they say. And maybe there's a line in there that makes sense, but reading them, it doesn't. Distances by water, what the hell is that? I don't know. All kinds of mumbledy-goop. Range is restricted. Okay. Interception, it's the 40-20 rule. Sea supply and sea escort says these activities must touch a port. So these look like they're unlimited, but they must touch a port every 20 or 10 hexes, with exceptions called out. Which, of course, you know, see 21.3615. That's not far, so we'll be hitting that soon. Yeah, there's whole sections on exceptions. Base changes 40-20 rule, offensive missions 40-20 rule, but again, these have those, like with the base changes, this say must touch a port at least once every 20 or 10. And that may be the case. That looks like it's the case for sea supply and ours. Sea escort. Oh no, those are the ones with no limit. And now we have exceptions. So like Hawaiian Islands has a set of exceptions because if Midway and Johnston Island are involved, you can cross up to 15 hexes before hitting a port. And that's really just a matter of it's too far away. But, you know, why are there special exceptions? I don't know, you know. Unlike the simple sea zones of WIF. Okay. And we're going to have these for all kinds of things. You have to just either memorize them all, or, you know, hey, maybe you'll remember that they might be there under certain cases and be able to look them up. But otherwise, you know, you look up you get used to the main rule and then realize, wow, I can't possibly invade Hawaii. Wait, is that real? And then maybe you look it up then. Oh, more exceptions. Naval units can sea transport into and out of, and ground units may conduct seaborne invasions from controlled islands which do not contain a port, if they're one-hex islands or a few special cases. Alright, that's enough for now. That's all I can cope with. I mean, seriously, you know, this rule book is just hell. And the one thing is, I kind of remember enough of the land actions from old Third Reich rules and such not that I could summarize that easily. I can't do that with the naval. The naval, I'm trying to learn it completely. I don't remember much of it from Rising Sun at all. Okay, rather than holding the rule book, I'm going to try this stone here. I don't know where we are. All kinds of exceptions. Naval activities. Alright, so some of the stuff that you can do as you're moving. Patrolling, you can move to a sea hex in order to attack other enemy bases, assist in ground attacks, and also to do counter interceptions during the movement phase. And you can actually stay out in patrol sometimes, but maybe not from this, during the opponent's turn to do interceptions. Essentially what patrol is you're moving to a base that's out at sea, you know, and that's going to be where you're going to be able to activate from. It's an offensive mission, and you've got to pay for the units or take a full offensive. Patrols by subs are free though, because they don't have fuel or anything. I don't know. Now that's actually a cool thing. One of the problems with WIF is the Germans have to essentially pay the opportunity cost of a naval action to get their subs out there, and that's hard to accept. On the other hand, anti-submarine activities also invoke the cost of a naval operation. Movement to patrol hexes, base changes, and all this stuff is contemporaneous. You can't change base in a movement phase in which you patrol. You can combine to do a joint patrol in the same hex. So they're going to be moving to the patrol hex at the same time, and they may join en route. And this is important because you have to trace these routes because they can all be intercepted. Okay. And then you announce your patrol's base changes and strategic warfare naval deployments. You do not announce any airstrikes by patrolling carriers. Why you would think you would do that, but okay. If you're conducting more than one patrol, you designate the sequence in which they'll be conducted. The first one moves towards its patrol hex, gathering together. It may be intercepted each hex of each unit that's moving. If the interception happens, there'll be a battle. If the patrol loses a naval combat, it has to return to its port and it's inverted. If no interception happens, the patrolling force continues. A patrolling force containing fast carriers, which has not yet arrived at its patrol hex, may do counter-air en route against any enemy air bases within range of its hex. Each patrolling naval air unit may only be used to counter-air one enemy base from each hex on its path. Surviving patrolling naval air units may be used to counter-air different enemy air bases once the patrol moves to a new hex. Until it reaches its patrol hex, each patrol can make only one counter-air attack against each enemy air base. So, this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You can hit each enemy air base once. So as you're moving, you can do counter-air operations all along your transport path. Well, if you have carriers. Fast carriers. As you enter each hex, the sequence set above is repeated. Interception, airstrikes, etc. or counter-air. Once you reach your patrol hex, you may launch repeated counter-air attacks and strikes against all enemy bases within range of your patrol hex. And before each round of counter-air strikes from the patrol hex, the defender has the option of attempting naval interception if he hasn't done so previously in that hex. When the moving player has finished all his counter-air attacks and airstrikes from the patrol hex, he announces whether its patrolling force is returning to base or remaining in the patrolling hex. So this gets you out to a location where you can project your air power. And then once you do that, you're allowed to stick around. If you remain in the patrol hex, the defender can attempt to intercept the patrolling force, I guess again, if he hasn't already done so. A resulting naval combat is resolved, the loser returns to base and is inverted, and the victor has the option of returning to base and being inverted for the remainder of the player turn or remaining in the patrol hex during the ensuing combat phase. Now this is an interesting thing because nowhere else has it said you can remain in the patrol hex, or can you remain in a hex after intercepting, but I think that's the general rule. We'll see an interception, but you know, there's an inconsistency to this repetitiveness, right? That may be back before in the interception and I skipped it, but I didn't see it. If it is, well, let's see how repetitive it is, because
Yeah, you can do a defensive patrol. Okay. Patrolling force can be intercepted, and we already covered most of this. You know, in each hex that it moves in its patrol hex, la la la. Well, we had to say this all over again, and that's okay. It's just, that's why the book's so big. And therefore, when reading it, you learn very quickly, skip over big chunks of the rules, skim it, you know, right? Unfortunately, there are key points that aren't easily found when you start doing that. And it also doesn't absorb it all. But it does make it perhaps a better reference. I'm not sure how big a deal it is when things are separated by half a page and repeated again. Okay, the air units, and this tells you the things the air units can do, the counter air and the air strikes during movement, during patrol, all again repeated. Patrolling units which remain at sea may counter-intercept if another friendly action generates an interception attempt. So if an enemy force gets within range of them, they can make a roll to counter-intercept. If they support, if they successfully support an intercepted friendly naval force, they get to join that force and continue with its operations, but they don't do that with raiders. I don't know if they have to go home then. And if they're unsuccessful, they have to go home. So they won't stay on patrol, but you can divide the force, you can divide forces out of the patrol to go handle counter-interceptions and such not. So you can put a big force out in the middle of the sea, and then, you know, the enemy sends a little probe out, and you don't react to that very heavily. Of course, remember, some of this, and we haven't gone over what yet, is going to be hidden through task forces. So you just know there's movement, you know there's a ship there or something. You may not know how much. We'll have to see just how that works, because that can be key. But like I said, it's limited. It's not a full, it's not like you have a task force on the map and a little task force pops out and you don't know which one has shipped, you know, many ships or not. Oh, if you fail to reach a force you're trying to support, you return to your patrol hex. That's what it was. Okay, but you can't counter-intercept in favor of the actions that are contemporaneous with your patrols, even though you assign these in some sort of sequence. You won't be allowed to counter-intercept those, and then it's going to be hard to remember those kind of exceptions to the whole process, one way or the other. Return to base prior to exploitation. Before the land combat exploitation, for some reason, these units are brought back. I don't know why that's called out as prior to exploitation, but they, you know, it's hard to explain where something happens in the sequence of play. And if the naval operations are heavily interleaved with the land operations, as they apparently must be, there we go, exploitation. So somewhere after ground combat. This is important because maybe those planes can be used for ground support. I'm not sure. Said something, ground something. I thought it was ground strikes or air strikes or something. But I think that's against ports. I don't know that term. We didn't see that in the land game. Okay, submarine patrol. Submarines can patrol in the same way as regular units. They patrol independent of them. They remain at sea when other units must return to base. If they do not return to base, they remain at sea until they attack, engage in naval combat, or the end of the opposing player's turn. During the opposing player's turn, they may be attacked in a single sortie by enemy land-based air units within range of their patrol hacks. And I'm not going to remember any of this shit. That's the problem. During the opposing player's turn, immediately after counter-air attacks are resolved. Each land-based air squadron may attack once. Air cover may be flown, you know, I mean, okay, everything. Submarine patrols can counter-intercept. German submarines may not remain on patrol on the Western Front during the Allied player turn if Germany conducted submarine warfare in the Atlantic SW box. Okay. Let's get through defensive patrols and then let's stop. Although I don't know why the numbering's set up the way it is. Sea transport is apparently under patrols? I got no idea what's going on here. No, it's under naval activities during the movement phase. Okay. Well, let's get through the rest of the patrols and then we can stop because my back's killing me, even with this box, because I have to lean on the book and try to hold it. This thing's not working. A defending naval force which intercepts and defeats a patrolling force can stay in the interception hex until the end of regular combat in the ensuing combat phase. The defending naval force is then considered to be on a defensive patrol, and that's, if it returns to base, it's inverted. That can attempt another interception or counter-interception from its patrol hex as if it was in a port. There's an exception to the normal. You can only intercept once per turn, which isn't that normal, because if you have a decent intercepting force, you're going to leave it out at sea. If a defensive patrol intercepts enemy naval activity, it may be counter-intercepted normally in any hex along its interception route. Okay, so when does this actually happen? You have to defeat the patrolling force. Yeah, I'm not sure if you have to do it in the patrol hex. If a defensive patrol intercepts an enemy naval activity, it may be counter-intercepted normally. Otherwise, defensive patrols may not be counter-intercepted. What the hell? In any hex along its interception route, including its patrol hex. I mean, what other option would there be? If you're going to counter-intercept, you have to counter-intercept along the route, and I don't know what that rule's there for. I'm always suspicious when I read a rule that doesn't seem to express anything rational, you know, anything that needs to be added. But this rule book is filled with things that are repetitive or that maybe don't need to be added. So I'm just going to write that off as, yeah, they're just stating the obvious. Sea supply, and not trying to say anything. Oil shipments and BRP grants by sea. Okay, so we've ended defensive patrols. Let's get to the bottom of the page though, because otherwise I'll skip these. Sea supply from ports. So. Okay, so here's things, we're reading the things that naval units can do in their turn during the movement phase. So, during the initial supply determination, okay, so this is different. The moving player may conduct the following naval activities. Okay, this is naval activities during the movement phase. Is initial supply segment part of the movement phase? I'm getting really sick of this. Initial supply segment. Yeah, it's down here. Okay. I'm just thinking that seems like a strange thing to have during the movement phase. So this is a subcategory of this, I guess. Okay, so the first thing that units can do is sea supply lines from ports do not require naval units. Okay. But they may require escort, and that's what's weird here. Each Western Allied sea supply line from the map board requires the use of one transport in relevant shipping area. Hey, it's a generalized rule. Oil counters can be shipped by sea. BRP grants are going to require a sea escort. And all naval activities can be protected. So the BRP grants require a sea escort. You can't just try to send them for free. Oil does not, and supply does not, but you are allowed to give them a protection, which I guess is different from Sea Escort, because Sea Escort's some required thing. Okay. But it serves to protect, I believe, unless maybe they can't be intercepted. Alright, let's stop for a while. Let's see if we can get a little further before I have to work. Sea transport. Destroyers can sea transport ground or air units by moving from a controlled port, island, eligible island. It's basically single hex islands or islands with no port on them. Or eligible mapboard box to another. This is subject to range restrictions for offensive operations set out in, we've had this before, that probably the 4020, but who knows for sure. You gotta look in the rule book every time you want to see, until someday maybe you memorize them all. Sea transport to and from mapboard boxes, all kind of special rules involving these. Their requirements: 1 destroyer factor for each ground air or air factor. However, 2 if it's from some of the off-map boxes, but not all of them, of course. Right? In U.S., South Africa, India, and Australia. Is that everything? That may be everything. Yeah. The Urals you aren't going to be. So instead of just saying from an off-map box, they list them so that you think, well, maybe there are ones that aren't until you look. And maybe there are ones that aren't. I don't know. There's like an Ethiopia box or something, right? Destroyer, right. It also requires 1 transport from the SW box through which the sea transport passes for every 5 ground or air factors from being sea transport. So if you're doing it from a mapboard box, you not only have to commit the destroyers, but you also need to have some transport units already in the sea transport box. Now those units have to be there for your BRPs, but I don't think they get expended for that. This though does expend their activity, or maybe this is the only thing they can be used for. Destroyers need not be at the base where they're embarking. They can sail to there and then sail on. There can be multiple bases of embarkation, only 1 debarkation, otherwise you'd need independent missions, which isn't a big deal. It's just you'd be tracing more missions across the board that could be intercepted. There's no real cost to doing these. Only naval units, other naval units can accompany destroyers on sea transport missions to protect them. They have to follow the same basic and movement requirements. You can't land forces on a bridgehead unless the bridgehead also contains a port, except for 1 or 2 hex islands. You may not be sea transported from one location to another and then sea transported again in the same turn. You debark during the movement phase and are subject to stacking limitations at the end of the movement phase. And it may be baked into here whether you can keep moving. Yeah, see, it's very hard to tell what's going on here, but it looks like, yeah, you're able to walk to the base and then get sailed out. I don't think you're going to be allowed to move. Yeah, after movement, you complete movement of air and sea transported ground. What? I don't know. It's not clear. One of the most important things to express, although it's in the sequence of play, is, you know, can I move? My ground units get picked up, and then can I move them again? What's up with that? You know, what's the controlling factor there? And the way that's worded, it sounds much freer than it sounds almost like you get to like have special turns or something to move those things.
And anything that's that complicated a wording had better be in the rules. Of course it's not, because that would be explanatory in some sense. And we want to take the rules up as much as possible to repeat ourselves. Just like these videos. We want to repeat the same complaint again and again. You know. So reading a chart like this, I can never get a picture of what my turn is going to be like. You know. Reading a rule book, if it's well written, can give me that image of, yeah, this is how I do a sea transport. I'm able to move first. I'm able to, yeah. But they don't have time for that. Okay. Unsuccessful sea transports. Naval units on a sea transport mission can be forced back to the port. This, they go all the way back to their original base. But the units that were embarked get sailed back to where you picked them up and dropped off there. So everything kind of ends up back where it started. And they incur a movement cost for debarking. Okay, sea transport of ground units. Isn't that what we just did? I guess there's air units too. Ground units may, okay, so here it is, may use their full movement capacity during the player turn in which they're sea transported. They may move to the part of embarkation before being sea transported, but may not conduct overruns. And then if they have sufficient movement factors and debarkation may be sea transported, they may move after being sea transported if permitted by their remaining movement factors, and may engage in overruns, offensive. Okay, so there is indeed a special movement phase for these units. Now, in practice, you probably don't have to be that careful. You can just kind of do sea transport within your movement phase, really. And probably the easiest way to handle things. Chris. Sea transport of air units, they must begin the turn in the base of embarkation. They're not going to be able to move first, and this is prohibited if there's too many air factors in the base of debarkation. Air units which have been sea transported may operate normally during their combat phase. There's no reflection in range. Alright, let's finish this section and then I'm done. Harbor attacks are resolved by moving player during the movement phase, and the attacks from patrols are completed, but prior to the completion of base chaining. Yeah, okay. This is not something terribly useful, you know, explaining where something is in the sequence of play to that detail. That's where you look at the sequence of play. Where does it happen? Maybe some general pointer because it's huge, but to carry out a harbor attack, the moving player must have achieved. It's just so amazing what they think is important enough, you know, to express in words to try to gain somebody's understanding with it. The idea that somebody would have the entire sequence of play plastered in their head and could read that and get some idea from that. To carry out a harbor attack, the moving player must have achieved the required research result, except for an initial German harbor attack. And this is resolved using the harbor attack table, which I have not seen. So we don't really know anything about these? I presume that it's naval units that do them? This is maybe like the frogmen and the mini subs from got a Pearl Harbor. Here, the harbor attack table. Okay, so I think they involve submarines and carriers, and a German initial one, which maybe is done with submarines and carriers. This is not well explained here. I mean, it may be better on the chart, but it's not well explained in here. I'm hoping that we see more about this. Let's look at the chart. Maybe this will tell us something. This is new to me. Now, it may be in the A3R rules. And of course, the first thing we discuss is where it is in the sequence of play. Again, like you have it pictured in your head. That is the most important thing that this rule book tries to convey. Where on the sheet of paper can you find it? And that may be important because the sheet of paper is so big, but you know, I don't know. It would be nice to know what this is. Yeah, it looks like they give kind of the rules on this chart rather than in the rule book. So you sail a submarine into a port and can attack, and you'll get a roll on there, and that's going to be, I think, an amount of damage points of some sort. I assume they're damage points to ships, but we're not sure of that yet. That's not explained here. Carrier attacks is a single operational fast carrier placed within 20 hexes of a hex within air range of the attack port. I don't know what the hell. The fast carrier cannot be intercepted, but it's inverted when the attack is made. I don't know if it stays at sea inverted. Oh no, it's in a port. Once the attacking player has announced the target port he wishes to attack by carrier, all the defending ships in that hex are revealed. The attacker then selects one or more defending named light ships as targets. One target is selected for each level of harbor attack result received. Yeah, it has to be hits on the ship. Carrier attacks are resolved by rolling 3 dice for each target and applying the modifiers set out on the harbor attack table. They're the modifiers. On the modifier result of 2 or less on any of the die rolls, that fast carrier is eliminated. Okay, so this is looks like a 2-die table. How were these done? 2 dice for each attack. Okay, so I guess the carrier attacks are more likely to get you big results, and you just get more dice on them. But there's some chance of getting eliminated. Is there a chance of getting eliminated with the sub? You would think that's very high. Doesn't look like it. The defender deploys into combat groups. The attacker selects one. The contents of that group are revealed. Targets are selected by following the target procedure set out in 22.93E, which does not sound like where we are, but maybe, yeah, it'll be in the combat section or something. Maybe this will be covered more there. Who knows? And you can imagine, I mean, I'm apologizing here because this is how I have to present it, but you can imagine how tough my naval scenario is going to be as well in terms of lookups, trying to get the feel for the flow of the game. It's been such a long time since I played Empire of the Rising Sun, and things may have changed. Most of the naval rules seem to apply to that. That was done much less rule book. That much I know. Oh god. So some activities are also done during the combat phase. We have the seaborne invasion. Now, certain special units like the commandos can just go off on their own in little boats or something and sail out and attack you. Special cases having to do with particular spaces. Okay, if you're going after an undefended... Okay, so whenever you do an invasion, you need destroyers and/or transports. 1 destroyer for each invading ground factor if you're attacking an empty hex. If it's a defended hex, you need 2 destroyers for each ground factor. Okay, so far I don't see the transports coming into this, but okay. If it's out of a map board box, you need an additional destroyer from the US, Indian, and Australian boxes only.
and a transport in the SW box for every 5 ground factors which invade from the US, India, and Australia box. Of course, that doesn't, apply to the South Africa box, or there might be some others. I can't think of them. They can sail to gather the forces. Let's try to skim through this as much as possible. In addition to some restrictions on naval movement, which we touched on before, we can't do it if it's a winter turn in Western and Eastern Front. I think that covers everything. And winter invasions of the Aleutians. Okay, what a naval movement through Western and Eastern Front sea hexes. Okay, I think that's in Europe only. You can do them in the Pacific. Okay, and you could do them in the Mediterranean. Those are the front divisions. You have to get at least 1-to-1 odds to make an attack. If there are enemy naval units in the invasion hex on the turn the invasion is to be resolved, you can't do it. Or if there's a task force there. So, and a task force has to have at least 10 naval factors. So you have to do something to clear those units out of the way for you to be able to do the invasion. Now, I don't know of anything you can do during the combat phase that might do that, but we'll see. Maybe there's port strikes or something that can be done. Eligible hexes, okay, in general, it's beaches, but there are a bunch of restrictions, or a bunch of exceptions to that general rule. For example, 1-hex islands are a very general exception. They're all considered to be invadable, but also things like Singapore and Gibraltar have their own specific exceptions called out. If you beat it at sea, you drive it back before it hits there. If it attacks, okay, it can be any number of ground combat units in the invasion up to the capacity of the invading destroyers. But no more than 2 of those units can actually attack the ground units in the hex, can actually influence the combat. The other units would be advancing into this bridgehead or whatever, potentially. Or be doing exploitation combat that might be generated from the attack. Now, of course, there's exceptions to that, which is there's these special units, Marines, Airborne, Commandos, stuff like that, that you can stack 3 additional units in to the attack, I guess. Shore bombardment can assist. That's triple the amount of ground factors. Same thing with ground support. You can send triple. And you can use ground support from naval, air, and CVEs for this. However, I think they only count a third because that's not noted here, but they're a third the size of the regular ground-based air. I may be mistaken though. Maybe they're full strength when used in an invasion because they're better. So that's the kind of thing that I'd have to look up and probably spend about 15-20 minutes in the midst of the first invasion to look up, and maybe once or twice more during the game if I forget. You do the resolve the combat as a ground combat. The losses can be taken off of the ground units, off of air units, off of naval units. There's reasons you wouldn't want to do some of those, obviously, but maybe it's more important to get additional ground units on board, so you'll take more expensive counters. You get a bridgehead if you succeed. Any additional units that can't land in the invasion hex are going to return to port, but it is possible if your initial invasion included an armored unit. And I think yeah, I think that's allowable. I know I have like some marine armor or something. No, there's like an airborne armor in this game. I don't know. I'm always iffy about that because I remember my Beetle Bailey cartoons that show tanks landing with parachutes attached to them. But yeah. Okay. So if you succeed in generating a breakthrough with your armor units, you end up being able to bring other armored units in the invasion
on top of the stack to exploit, just as if they were attacking in a ground hex, and they don't get counted against overstacking for that, I don't believe. The CTL of armor units exploiting from a breakthrough from Seaborne, though, is reduced, which might affect their capability to exploit. You can only move forward by exploiting on the turn of the invasion. You can't do attrition through with units that are invading a hex, so you can't stack extra units into the bridgehead and try to count them for attrition or something. Shore bombardment, you know, honestly, this isn't too different from the airstrikes, except that you create a little naval mission to sail out and go do a shore bombardment mission, and that'll end up supporting a ground attack. And what do we have here? Yeah. And I'm not quite sure. I think what happens is you just sort of sail out, you position yourself for it, and then as you're resolving the ground attack, you take it into effect. Maybe in the sequence of play it shows something different. Maybe you can sail them out in the midst of the attack. I gotta be careful that I don't end up stoning those units. I'm trying to get this to lay a little flat, but probably just breaking the thing. Okay, and then you've got losses as attributed to the heavy, to the various ships that are involved. They have a limitation on how many losses. I don't know what it is. I'm having trouble reading here. They may be distributed as desired. It's not jumping out. May not exceed the value and combat factors of the shore bombardment component of the ground attack. So you're not going to be able to lose triple the amount of units. I don't know why that is an issue. Do not exceed the value and combat factors of the shore bombardment component. Yeah, I don't know why that would factor into anything. Okay. We saw raiders in the North Atlantic scenario. And what raiders are going to do is they're going to sail out to try to make it into the strategic warfare boxes. And they can be intercepted on their way to those boxes. Once they get there, what they do is some sort of raider table. There it is. That's to determine whether or not enemy forces, enemy fleets out in the strategic warfare battle box can find you. And you roll a die, you get a result on here, and you can always take a lesser result. For example, if you don't have a 4-factor battleship, you could have a destroyer attack or something. And then whatever is found fights a round of battle with the raiders. If the raiders are able to drive off the defending forces, and there's actually a modifier against those defending forces because they're protecting convoys, then the raiders are allowed to attack using the naval attack table, I think, unless there's some other table that I vaguely remember there being some other table that looked interesting for a while, but I don't know where it is. But I think they attack on the naval attack table against the transports, and then they do more damage against that. Then, as they're disengaging, there's another chance that they get caught on the way back to their port. And that's pretty much the sum of the raider rules. See how easy it is if I remember how to do something, you know. Now, the raiders are going to be separated into groups. You can cluster them all together, or you can send them out in separate groups. In general, how well they can hit what the transports they're hitting, you know, it's kind of useful to cluster them, but there's possibilities that, I don't know, that you might not get all your raider groups caught, so you might be able to get some raiders into play. And it's really going to be a problem of looking at the situation at the couple of charts and seeing, hey, does it make sense to split my raiders or not against what I'm facing. Okay, fast carriers have their own missions, which appear to be missions that happen during the combat phase, number-wise.
They have their range restrictions, which maybe not allowed from, so like here I'm not allowed to do them from South Africa. Maybe I'm not allowed to do some of those other missions where, you know, it says, hey, I'm allowed to invade with destroyers from there. Maybe I'm just not allowed to invade. That wasn't spelled out where I was able to quickly see. And that is one thing. Some of the structure of this makes it fairly easy to quickly assess some of the information, but other parts of it, like if you know what to look for, other parts of it, sometimes it's hidden, you know. And that's life, right? You have to pay offensive points to do any of these naval missions, really. The timing, of course, we have to tell you where it happens inside the sequence of play. But it looks like it happens at different times. Like it can happen during a seaborne invasion. You have to have your fast fleet factors assigned to your carrier as always. They can do carrier air missions. I don't know what other kind of missions they can do, but we'll see. It looks like sea supply. Only one mission. They combine in a single attack against the same target. Each naval air unit can do a counter-air attack or airstrike against a single enemy base. But they can fly multiple sorties. And this is important because remember, like with the counter-air, you can just keep flying because the combat table for air combat has changed from what it used to be. It's no longer just this mathematical and deterministic calculation. It's now some die rolls on a chart. It tends to work very similarly though, and you have no limit to the number of times you can strike, but the attacker starts getting weaker and probably can't maintain too many rounds. We saw that in Barbarossa, how that kind of worked out. Okay, so it's important to see that these are different from patrols because you don't do these during movement, you do them during combat. You can do them in conjunction with a seaborne invasion, which you can't with a patrol, unless you have like this weird counter-interception thing where you pick up the force that you went to go save, and then you can go do their mission with them. You can change base before doing a fast carrier mission. You can't do that with patrol. Patrol is sort of the base change to get you out to sea where you can, you know, change your interception patterns and such not. Naval air units on fast carrier mission may not counter-air enemy bases while they're sailing there. That was one of the cool things about patrol, is I can just sail through a string of islands and shoot up all the planes on the way. They can't counter-intercept, and they may launch repeated counter-air attacks or airstrikes against all enemy bases within range of the patrol hex. This is on patrol. Naval air units on a fast carrier mission can only do it against a single enemy base target. And then finally, I'm allowed to sea supply, oil shipments, and BRP grants. And I don't know why this... Oh, these are defined during the post-combat segment, whenever I want to do these kind of traces of supply. So now we'll go to Sea Escort when I come back, but I'm tired of looking at roles. I don't know how, you know, we've got hours of naval roles. And then we've got the strategic warfare later. And it's really a matter of, these aren't right at the tip of my tongue. So, you know, I'll say this many, many more times because I have to keep flipping through the rule book and inching my way through it. Okay, let's continue this Sea Escort. Whenever you're redeploying across water or moving BRPs or oil counters across water, redeploying with non-naval factors, you have to sea escort them with destroyers or transports. And that may be both, actually. Range limitations were listed below. It can happen during the movement phase, oil shipments and BRP grants. Combat phase, oil shipments and BRP grants. And redeployment phase, any NRing of ground and air units. Takes one destroyer to sea escort each ground or air factor, kind of like with the invasions or whatever. The destroyers are required to escort, 3 destroyers for each oil counter shipped by the European Axis. 1 transport for every 5 ground or air factors I'm sorry. Okay, so yeah, you're going to need both, I guess. A destroyer for sea escort for ground or air factors, 1 transport for every 5 ground or air factors, 1 transport for every 5 BRPs that you're grading by sea, a transport, and we may have hit some of this before. This is how these rules go, and you know, as long as I don't have them kind of memorized, this is why the video bloats. 1 transport for each oil counter shipped by sea by the Western Allies or Japan. Note this. So the Axis has to send 3 destroyers, whereas the Western Allies or Japan have to use a transport. Destroyers must be used for sea escort on anything that begins and ends on a map board. I'm not sure what is and is not the map board. Must be used for sea, yeah. Transports may be used to sea escort between the following locations. Between ports on the Western Front. I don't know what this may is. I thought this was all must. Western Allied sea escorts between certain places in the Pacific. Western Allied sea escorts between some other places in the Indian Ocean. Japanese escorts are for ports and eligible islands, and this is using transports. One gets the feeling that that's not in addition to the destroyers, but rather in replacement for them, the way this is worded. But sea escorts using transports may be continued using destroyers. So, you know, yeah, my feeling is in some certain special cases you don't need destroyers, but that's not expressed well in the ordering. But it becomes clear later on. Of course, if you're just looking up to see what's going on, you want to see something, you might not read the whole rule, right? To find out that, yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean everything. It doesn't have to be interpreted the way it reads. You might not notice that. Destroyers used for sea escort must be either in the embarkation hex, or they have to be able to sail to it in order to pick it up. Transports may only have 1 base of embarkation and 1 destination, which all kinds of restrictions on where you can pick stuff up and everything, and it's all very specific and all very much something that's not going to stick in the head. You're going to have to look it up for each escort. And what happens if you abort? Well, I guess you kind of go back. That seems to be the general rule. I don't want to read it all, you know. I mean, that's the problem with this book, is you don't want to read it all. It's not enjoyable to read. It's just a series of cases without any glue to hold them together, really. If you don't have enough, the cargo gets eliminated midway. And then things that return to their base of embarkation can still SR or TR from that base. And then you're allowed to uninvert. Uninverting naval units is based on the number of oil counters assigned to naval purposes. Over in the Barbarossa scenario, you were able to uninvert your air units as much as you like, basically. I don't remember if naval units had that same capacity. I wasn't really concerned with naval units in Barbarossa. Alright, I'm done for now. There's too much to cope with. Okay, the game rules or something that's making me nauseous. Maybe just my glasses.
So I drank some fermented cranberry juice, oops. But also went out for a swim, so now we'll start hitting. Naval interception, so some things are unable to be intercepted. If you're raiding from Bergen or Scapa Flow, you can make it out for free. Other special cases like that. Whenever you go out to the SW box to engage the raiders, you get there for free, no matter where you're coming from, basically. Axis units, basically in the Baltic, I think. Some units can't intercept, again, more special cases. Raiders can be intercepted on the map board, though, while they're moving normally, except in those special cases. Naval units on an offensive patrol cannot counter-intercept, but they can support intercepted friendly naval units. It doesn't cost you anything in order to do so. You select the hex along the path that you're going to intercept. You're only going to be allowed to intercept one hex along the route. You'll see this a little different. I think air interception works a little differently. Through straits cause an automatic interception? No, I don't know about that. Naval activities which pass through straits are distinct naval activities for interception on each side of the strait. There may be a limitation to passing through the straits, though. I seem to remember that to the person who owns it. Each time a force tries to carry out a naval activity, it can be intercepted. Even if some of those units even if some or all of the force has been intercepted before. If it joins with other units in the course of a naval activity, it's a new force which is subject to combined interception, or an interception of the combined force. If you split a force, once it's split, as it moves out of its hex, it's subject to interception in the split portions. I think submarines can make a separate interception, though. That seems to be what that's trying to say. You can be intercepted in the hex in which you're going to be taking an action. Air attacks or naval activities are distinct from naval interceptions, and they can be made on any hexes along the route of the activity, and that'll be in the next section of the rules. Interceptions of different activities are permitted. Okay, so you can split up your force and make different interceptions with different units on that force. Task force intercepts separately. So each task force has to make its own interception check, I believe. I think. Naval units which are not in a task force can intercept each enemy target regardless of the size of the enemy target. I don't know. You don't have to bring everything at one shit. God, my back's killing me trying to do this. One interception per hex only. We already said that. Defensive patrols can intercept just as though they were in port. Now, we don't know exactly how defensive patrols happen. We know that one way is by intercepting an offensive patrol at its patrol hex or before it gets there, and then winning the battle. You can stay out there. And then we repeat lots of roles we've had before. Sea escorts and NRs are intercepted separately. Cooperation rules apply. It's all happening at the same time, so you can't kind of pulse those in any sort of way. When you intercept, you can be counter-intercepted, and this takes place before the combat from the interception will take effect. If you're counter-intercepted in the same hex that you're intercepting the moving player's naval force, a single battle is resolved with all the forces present. if you're counter-intercepted in a different hex, you only battle the counter-intercepting forces. Counter-intercepting more than one intercepting task force. They're counter-intercepted together before the interceptions hex. A single naval battle is resolved. So whatever's present in the hex that you're passing through is... I remember there being something weird about timing if you're crossing in the old Empire of the Rising Sun. So let's try to keep an eye out for that. Offensive patrol support for friendly naval activities. Okay, naval units on offensive patrols do not roll dice to counter-intercept. Instead, they counter-intercept the forces that are being intercepted. If it's within 3 hexes of the patrol, they move automatically and hit in the first round of naval combat. If it's more than 3 hexes, it's going to be timed. A certain amount of rounds go by based on the distance. If it doesn't engage in the battle, it turns around and goes back to its patrol hex, if I recall correctly. I think we've touched that already somewhere in the rules, so I'm not going to read these rules to see if I can understand what's going on. So that's one thing that duplicating rules do to me, is I expect something, so I pass it, I skim through, and I pass things by. You know, I don't know how you are, but that's how it affects me. You can intercept naval units as they return to port, and that's done when that happens, whatever. You can combine air and naval interceptions. And that probably has some rules. You're going to follow this chart, whatever this chart is, and that'll be somewhere in the charts, I hope. And what do? You roll a bunch of dice equal to, I guess, the different factors that you add up here. The cumulative total is used, and, well, it's used, you know. Like, that's cool. Doesn't tell you how, but... Okay, 2 dice a roll. Okay, so now we explain each of these little indications, I think. Like, everything's spread out and worded. Air squadrons are going to affect your chance. All kind of stuff like this. Now, if the die roll is equal to or greater than the distance in hexes from the Naval Forces base, then you have a successful interception. Subject to any counter-interceptions, and the intercepting naval forces engages the intercepted naval forces in the first round of naval combat. If you fail completely, you go back. Yeah, it's as if you didn't go anywhere. If you get a partial failure, if you roll less than... and I don't know what it means to be failing completely, except maybe by reading another thing. Yeah, okay, if nothing succeeds, nothing moves. However, if you roll less than the distance from the Naval Forces base to the interception hex, the force is not in the first round of combat, but it can join later rounds of combat, and this will be based on a distance versus the die roll type thing. Basically, if you could get to a certain range of the interception hex successfully, i.e. your die rolls within a certain range, you delay for a few rounds. I think somebody has to have succeeded in the interception. Okay, once the interceptions have been made, and the rolls have been made, and you have successes on there, and this becomes really complex if there's a lot of fleets kicking around that can intercept, because you're going to have to mark this shit down somehow. Then the counter-interceptions can be made against those, and those can happen as those happen probably as the intercepting force is making its way. So you kind of pause the interception attempt midway through, and you could catch, you know, parts of fleets you weren't counting on, that weren't counting on being caught separately that way. Everything on a different path is intercepted separately, If two or more intercepting task forces are traveling along the same path, we've got a whole set of rules that handles that, and this almost never happens, but whatever. In the first round of naval combat, the counter-intercepting forces engage all the intercepting task forces that have reached the counter-intercepting hex. This is based on the distance that they travel. If they haven't reached yet, they join in subsequent rounds of naval combat as per 22.24b, which is this rule up here we were talking about the distance of intercepting forces. This may be just reflecting that. Yeah, this is intercepting task forces. Okay. And counter-interceptions can be counter-intercepted. Whatever intercepts ends up being inverted when they return to base if they engaged in combat. If they don't engage in combat and all interceptions failed, they don't get flipped. If the naval force they intercept is eliminated or aborted before they arrive for the battle, they don't flip. There's some other things that can cause it not to flip. Anything that doesn't take part in the naval combat is subject to attack or counterattack interception and are not inverted, huh? I don't know. Something. You know, I mean, this is what the rule book does to me, is I figure, well, I'll have to look it up because I'm not going to remember. Naval force can abort if it's attacked or is engaged. If it's combined, whatever the hell, to carry out its naval activity, aborted or eliminated, it doesn't have to try to connect up. If it aborts and returns to base, it can be attacked on the way back, I guess, maybe. And if it contains transports and it is aborted, the transports may or may not be used. The transports are unaffected, I guess. But they can't be used for the rest of the turn. Okay, well, that's enough for now. I'll probably get some more done tonight. Alright, let's see if we can handle naval combat itself. Combat's going to consist of carrier airstrikes against land-based air units, carrier and land-based airstrikes against enemy naval forces, fleet combat, and sub-attacks. As a series, okay. And these keep going through until somebody's gone. If the moving player counter-intercepts an intercepting naval force, the intercepting and counter-intercepting naval forces are placed in the counter-interception hex, and then you follow that procedure. The naval force originally intercepted does not participate unless they happen in the same hex. Okay. Land-based air units within range of a naval battle are allowed to participate by either being attacked by carrier-based naval air units, providing air cover, searching, or directly attacking an enemy naval force. Land-based air units may not attack enemy air or naval bases in the course of the naval combat. Army air units participate in naval combat as squadrons, so they're going to be broken down into their constituent, where each single point is actually 3 squadrons, each Army air factor. Naval combat involving raiders in an SW box is resolved without the need for combat groups, search, and possible surprise. And we looked at some of how this is done. It's going to be a single round of naval combat. Let's see. Each force is a single combat group. Each combat group is deemed to have found the other. No surprise. Any carrier strikes are resolved. Then a single round of fleet combat. Then all defending units which engaged a raiding group, if they're sunk, then the transports can be attacked. And then there's a second round of airstrikes and fleet combat after reinforcing naval units are added to the Western Allied Combat Group. I don't know how you reinforce these, but whatever. Okay, the first thing you do is you secretly assign your combat group numbers to your participating task forces. This is going to be done, and I say there's this TFCG, I don't know what the hell that's for, but this is done here. You have these markers, you put one marker on top of the ships that it represents, and one marker goes somewhere else. It's going to be available to be attacked, essentially. So your opponent doesn't know what he might be choosing to attack. Now, there's a naval combat chart. That's what we need. So this is where the CGs go. They go on here. In fact, they're represented by the numbers here. So I don't know what the counters are for. Okay. Then each player is allowed to allocate some of his carrier-based naval air to counter-air enemy land-based air units. And that'll be in the next section. Each player then announces and carries out a single round of counter-air attacks. Land-based air units which are not eliminated by the counter-air can then participate in the ensuing round of combat. Then each player secretly assigns his unused carrier-based naval units. I guess unused is what they didn't use against enemy naval bases. Air bases. To offensive airstrikes and defensive operations for that combat round. Land-based air can be assigned air cover operations. If they're within range of the naval combat units, you secretly assign them to specific combat groups. Now, what's kind of a pain here is there are no squadron counters. However, maybe you use these search, attack, and cover markers. I thought those were used to represent everything, but maybe they represent squadrons of Army air factors. Don't know. Then you roll a search roll, and you may find some combat groups. And you'll be given some information for the groups you found, whether they're less than 10 naval factors, how many fast carriers they are, whether it's a fast or slow group, and whether it has cargo. Then you're allowed to attack with land-based and carrier-based air units. One surprise carrier-based airstrike maximum is allowed per side, and then there's also the non-surprise airstrikes. Now, this is all going to be explained later. I just want to give you the sequence for some reason here. Then you do fleet combat, then subs get an attack, and then we reach an interphase where each side is allowed to withdraw forces, and there's the potential of forces that are, say from an interception or something that can reinforce into the battle. Okay, forming combat groups. Before the first round of naval combat, each task force unencumbered by cargo forms a separate combat group of its own. Unencumbered task forces may not be broken down and may not combine with other unencumbered task forces to form combat groups. Intercepting naval forces containing less than 10 naval factors unencumbered by cargo combine and form a single naval group, a single combat group. A naval force carrying cargo, including unprotected sea supply line and transports, may be strengthened by combining with an unencumbered combat group. One thing that's going to be confusing about this is I think you're breaking apart stacks on the board, and then they get allocated amongst here, and it's going to be hard to remember how to put them back together in some cases. At least with the stuff that's not part of a task force. Combat groups formed by combining small naval forces, the combination of unencumbered and encumbered naval forces, let's go to the next page. We're going to rip the book with this thing, but it's the only way to read it. May not contain more than 25 naval factors. Any surplus forms a second separate combat group, and so on. What were these? Are these task forces? Combat groups, by combining small naval forces, or encumbered and unencumbered naval forces. Whatever. Something is meant by this, you know. It's kind of what I get out of it usually. And they also must contain fast fleet factors for each fast carrier factor. Surplus carriers may not voluntarily join in naval combat and must return to port. I guess that's surplus of the pooled crap. I don't know what encumbered and unencumbered is. You know, you think that may have been defined? I can't remember. Unencumbered by cargo. Okay, that's task forces. Those carrying cargo may be strengthened. Maybe it'll make sense when I'm playing it, right? Maybe. Who the hell knows? Yeah, this is totally fucking useless, but each task force, and I've read it, it just didn't make any sense then either. The only way it makes sense is looking it up every goddamn step of the play. And eventually you start to understand. Each task force which enters an ongoing naval battle after one or more rounds of naval combat have been completed forms its own combat group. Now, one problem is you're only allowed 6 friendly combat groups in the battle in any given round of combat. The other things are going to be kind of off to the side. They're in the periphery, and they can't be attacked. Combat groups to which cargo has been assigned must participate in the naval combat. Otherwise, the owning player decides which groups in the naval combat and which are surplus. After the first round of naval combat is resolved, surplus combat groups can participate in the second round of combat only if some of the groups withdraw or were eliminated, so that no more than 6 combat groups participate in the second round. Combat groups are either fast or slow. It's fast unless it either is carrying cargo or has damaged ships or a slow ship. Okay, and I think we need to break again. I can't cope with this.